So I am really excited about the first session you're going to listen to today. And this is the second time that I've actually had the pleasure of being able to introduce Hayley. I've known Hayley for a few years and have learned so much from her over these years, and continue to learn every day by, again, following some of her amazing social media work. Now, Hayley Bennett is a multi-award winning equity, diversity and inclusion consultant and campaigner. Hayley is well recognized as a thought leader in her field and has been featured in The Times, Metro.co.uk and The Washington Post. Her passion for inclusion in sport led her to create Nutmegs, a football community for women of colour and non-binary people of colour. In 2020, she was named as one of the most influential Black people in football. Hayley is going to be talking about breaking barriers and sharing the things that other women have taught her along the way. So over to you, Hayley. And again, thank you for being a part of today's event.
Oh, thanks so much, Ash. Yeah, you're definitely an energy angel. I was going to say that. I love that. Thank you for having me, and thanks for everybody who has tuned in. I'm going to start sharing my screen with you. I've just got a few slides that I wanted to share with you, so you don't have to just stare at my whole face the whole time. So, being true to myself, I've chosen to use the time we have together on International Women's Day to amplify some other women's voices that have inspired me along the way. So I'm going to be sharing some lessons that they have taught me with the hope that they'll be able to teach you something too. And as the theme of the event is breaking barriers, I started to reflect and think deep and hard about some of the barriers that I faced along my career. And it wasn't actually as easy as I thought. Some of them are really obvious. And some of these examples that I came up with were barriers that other people have put in front of me, or society has put in front of me too. So whether that is starting out being one of only 8 girls in an all-boys school and just surviving, being named as one of the most influential Black people in football for the work that I've been doing to champion diversity and inclusion in that space, but also behind the scenes, pursuing a dream of creating a children's book that inspires more girls to get involved in sport, despite being told by publishers and major publishing houses that the idea wasn't marketable because women's sport's not popular enough yet. But what I realised when I was doing this reflecting is that a lot of the barriers that I have faced are also barriers that I've actually put up for myself. So I have never actually wanted to go to university, and that was something that I always said. And maybe that's because my parents hadn't gone to university, they still ended up being really successful, but I just didn't feel like it was for me. Despite that, I really did push hard, and I tried to do as well as I could, and I managed to get into my top choice university. I actually lecture now at the University of Bolton, and I've been published as an academic too. So it just goes to show that that was a bit silly for me to think in my teenage years. But when I was at university, I actually struggled quite a lot with my mental health, to the point where I honestly didn't feel like I'd become anything. So the fact that I'm here speaking to you all today is quite weird and surreal for me, but a pleasure. One of the reasons why I felt that way was because, like many of you may be in this position now, I had spent a lot of time applying for jobs and I wasn't getting anywhere. In fact, I remember I applied to 259 jobs unsuccessfully. And I remember that number because I kept a spreadsheet that still haunts me to this day. But just when I was at my lowest point and I wanted to give up, I landed my dream job in football, and the rest is history. So I wanted to start off by sharing a couple pictures of you to illustrate my journey so far. So the top picture, I'm standing next to my favourite teacher in the boys' school. This is actually the end of my time at the school. What you can't see from the picture is that I'm trying to hold 7 prizes. So at the end of the term, we always used to have like a prize day, and I won the most prizes in the whole school by quite a long way, actually. So I guess you could say I not only survived the boys' school, I actually won it. The picture of all of us at Wembley, you can see me there surrounded by some amazing women. That was one of the first ever events that we had for Nutmegs. It meant so much for me to get us into the national stadium, to do something incredible and get a lot of these women to experience football for the first time, which was always my dream. The bottom picture is an almost unrecognisable me. So this is me on my first ever week of work. And I couldn't believe it that I'd been able to turn up and go to West Ham's old stadium. So as you follow football, you'll recognise the Berlin ground in the background. And it was a massive moment for me to realise that actually my dreams could kind of come true. Now, I'm definitely one to downplay my accomplishments, but a lot of this has come through, perseverance, my passion, and just to be honest, resilience around the barriers that I faced along the way. But I think what today is all about, and what I wanted to share with you, is that I couldn't be where I am today without the help of some amazing women who have guided me at key moments, but continue to guide me every day. So I wanted to share some of those lessons with you. And it wouldn't be right if I didn't start off today by sharing with you some advice from my mentor. So my mentor is called Michelle Moore. This is one of her favourite sayings, stand in your light. And I'm pretty sure she would have been saying this to me right now, because every time she gears me up to do something like this is something she'll always say. And what she means by this is you've got to be bold and you've got to be fearless when the light is on you or when your time has come. Now, being a woman in a male-dominated industry, or being one of the youngest people in a team, or just simply be in a room with people who don't look anything like you, it can be really, really daunting. And there's definitely been moments where I've had to battle with my own inner voice telling me that I need to change myself to get ahead, or I'm not good enough to be where I am. And actually, along the way, I've been told this by other people, normally people who are more senior than me, more experienced than me, that are telling me that I need to maybe change how I talk, change how I dress, or even change my hairstyles to fit in or to do better. And what's really interesting about this is actually, now I run my own business, probably the most common piece of good feedback that I hear from my clients is that they like my authentic and real approach. So I've really learned to sharpen and be myself. But Deloitte research actually tells us that almost half of people in workplaces take part in covering. Now, what they mean by that is that people downplay their differences to fit into a dominant culture. So I wanted you to think about whether you've actually ever felt that you have to cover who you are, change who you are to fit in, either in work or in education, because it is something that we are subtly told to do and something that we expect of ourselves too. So have you ever had to do this? As women and as people from marginalised identity, covering is actually necessary for survival a lot of the time in organisations. Sometimes we're told to cover. A piece of research that always shocks me is that 2/3 of people from ethnic minority backgrounds have been told to change their names in order to get ahead in their careers. And that's just outrageous and shocking, and it still happens today, and it's very common actually. But covering, it doesn't only prevent us from just flourishing as our authentic selves, it can be really, really tiring actually. So along the way, just to, save some energy, it's something that I've tried to stop doing as much as I can. And showing up as yourself is something that empowers others and it enables others to sharpen themselves too. So this is something that I always try to do, especially when I'm working with people who are early on in their careers or less experienced than me. But let's be realistic. The work that I do as a diversity and inclusion consultant shows me that there are actually a lot of organisations out there who encourage their employees to cover and to hide their authenticity in the workplace. Those companies are people who are missing out on the benefits of diversity and inclusion. Research has actually shown that being authentic improves productivity, it improves performance, and it even leads to greater success. So what I would say to all of you is, when it comes to breaking barriers, the best thing you can do is be your authentic self. The power of being different is that you actually bring something different to the table. So as many employers know, and part of the reason why we're here today, I've done a lot of work with enterprise and they definitely live by this, is that diverse teams outcompete non-diverse teams. So employers want someone who's different and they want someone who's going to be different to be able to thrive in their organisation. So I have done a bit of reflecting with you today. I want you to do a bit of reflecting too. So I wanted to ask you this question. We always think about what we could potentially lose or miss out of if we hide who we are, if we're not authentic. I want you to think about what could you gain from being your true self. Now, this might be at an interview, maybe you're already working. What could you actually gain from being your true self and letting a bit more of yourself show? So I'd be keen to hear some of your thoughts in the chat if you're willing to share that. My second piece of advice or lesson that I learned, it's an interesting one because this is something I've known all my life. As you can imagine, I'm somebody whose career revolves around this very notion. But this is something that I learned as a lesson at one of the lowest points in my career, actually. And it's this, that we need to advocate for all, not just those who experience the same barriers as we do. So at the height of the Black Lives Matter movement last summer, most of you would have been aware that there was this huge call for allyship. And I guess this is what I'm talking about, being an ally and recognising the barriers that other people face. Gender pay gap data in the UK tells us that more than 3 out of 4 UK companies pay their men more than their women employees. You know, Ash gave us some amazing stats at the beginning today. In 9 out of 17 sectors in the economy, men earn more than 10% than women on average. But what's interesting is if you look deeply into this data, it tells us that for disabled women, this is as large as 18.9%. LSE also recently found out that whilst all women experience huge differences in pay and representation in top jobs, it is Black women who have the lowest probabilities of being top earners. So for me, true allyship comes from taking risks and recognising this. In a career-defining moment of my own life, this is a lesson that I was taught because I was experiencing discrimination in terms of how I was being treated as as being the only person of colour in my team. And I suspected that I was being treated differently in terms of my pay as well. And my suspicions were actually confirmed by a white woman who showed allyship to me by revealing that my suspicions were correct. I was indeed getting paid 15% less than her, despite her thinking that she thought I should be being paid more than her. Now, at that moment, a lot of things are going through my head. I remember thinking I need to get the hell out of here and move on to bigger and better things. But it taught me that the reality as well is that sometimes some barriers we can't break down on our own. We actually rely on the actions of allies. And I remember when I received my award from the Football Blacklist last summer, I was given a platform by a national newspaper. And I remember thinking I need to use this platform in the best way that I can. And I chose to use that platform to advocate for the rights and inclusion of trans people in sport. It's now more important than ever that we show up and we stand up and support people who need it. So my challenge for you and my reflection question for you is a bit like what Ash mentioned earlier. What have you done for others lately? What will you commit to doing to support others to break barriers? In an industry or a job where you're facing your own barriers, sometimes you can feel demotivated. Sometimes it can feel like you want to give up. The best thing that you can do is to think about all the other people who you might be able to help along the way. So don't just do this for you, do it for others as well. This is something that I have been spending a lot of my time talking about with employers since the death and the killing of George Floyd last summer. In terms of my tips for you around how you can be a better ally, whether that is for people who come from a range of different backgrounds to you, I think the key thing is around speaking up when you need to. If you're given an opportunity or a platform, use your voice. And second of all, educate others. It's very likely that you'll come across people in your careers who don't have open minds, who might not have knowledge around certain subjects that you do. So use that, educate people and use your platform, especially if you're somebody who's not experiencing the issues and the struggles that somebody else might be. So my third and final lesson to share with you is a lesson that I've learned from my mentees, so the people that I mentor. And these are some of them. I've just noticed in this slide, my hair is different in every picture, but I can confirm it is me. And I can also confirm that I miss getting my hair done and changing my hair like we probably all do. But these are some of my mentees who are inspiring me all the time. They have taught me to never underestimate the impact that you are having on others. People are watching what you do, even if you don't realise it. And I don't mean that in a weird way. I mean that as women in 2021, we're still blazing a lot of new trails for women to follow in our footsteps. And I've been surprised whenever Tosin, Tyra, or Mara have told me just how much I've helped them through a difficult time, or when they thanked me when they've gone on to do something amazing. Most of the time, I've just not even understood what I've done to support them. With the companies that I work with, I tell them all the time about the need to amplify the stories of role models. There is an overused but true phrase that you can't be what you can't see. And this is definitely the case, but it is a lot deeper than that. There are, having a lack of role models for people from marginalized communities means that they can often feel like they don't belong. And there's definitely been times when I felt like this. Research says that 81% of women believe that having a role model helps raise aspirations, but 55% of people say that there's not enough role models to actually choose from. So I'm curious, and I'd love to hear from you in the chat. Do you have a role model? Now, this might not be somebody that you've met. It might be somebody who's famous or somebody that you've read about, or is it somebody who's very real, or someone who's part of your life? For me, there's actually only 5 Black women on 415 sports boards in the UK. So there's not that many people that I can inspire to emulate, which is one of the reasons why I set up my own organisation. Not having somebody to relate to can feel quite lonely, and it can actually force you to cover or to hide your authenticity. It can feel quite isolating being the only person that looks like you, especially if you are a woman entering a male-dominated industry. But the way that I've actually overcome this is by finding some role models, finding people who can support me, but actually as well, finding people who might be earlier on in their journey or even at a similar stage that I can give that peer support to. So even if you feel like you're at the beginning of your life as a student, there's always people that you can connect with, whether that's on LinkedIn or even today, there'll be people that you can chat to and find a bit more about. So my last reflection question and challenge to you is this. Again, some inspiration is often needed for us to push through these, glass ceilings or barriers, is remembering, what the impact that we can have on others is. So who could you be a role model to, both now and in the future? And I know some of you might be thinking, oh, I'm not a role model, I'm never going to be a role model. But a study's actually revealed that 70% of girls think differently about their futures when they hear from another woman who's a role model. And CMI research tells us that role models aren't actually always necessarily famous people. They're real and they're approachable people that can have a direct impact on that individual's life or career. So think about who might be watching you, who could learn from you, and what learnings that you could share with others. My tip for you would be to use the time we've got now that we are, in very surreal circumstances. It's much more acceptable nowadays to reach out to people and connect with them online. LinkedIn, social media is a great tool. I've met some amazing role models and some of my mentees through social media too. So it's something that I would encourage you to make the most of now that we are all inside. So my final reflection, I want to share with you. I've done a lot of reflecting to put this together and to share with you today. We have still got a really, really long way to go to advance gender equality, as Ash shared. In fact, during this pandemic, we've gone backwards. The UN is telling us that this pandemic could wipe out the past 25 years of progress around gender equality. So yeah, there's a lot of work to be done. And the barriers seem even greater for some women in some industries or some women from certain backgrounds. Sometimes this can feel really discouraging, and that's okay. But on International Women's Day, let's reflect on where we've come as individuals and as organisations. So I'd like you to use the time that we've got today, after this event, during this event, thinking about which women have inspired or helped you along the way. This might be your mom, it might be a really amazing teacher that you had, it might be somebody who you've spoken to and somebody's doing a role that you would really like to have in the future. Please thank them, use this day to thank them, acknowledge them. I'm sure dropping them a message or lifting them up will really help them and support them with the barriers that they'll be breaking. And if you haven't got that person already, I'd like you to think about how you can actually show up and be that woman for somebody else. So thank you so much for having me. I hope that you will do some reflecting and that you find that interesting and that you enjoy the rest of the day. And I will hear from you on the panel as well.
Wow, thank you so much, Hayley. To hear from your experience has been fantastic. I think we're really lucky to have the opportunity to listen to you today. So thank you. And I love seeing in the chat, there's so much activity. Everybody's answering those questions, lots of different role models, which is amazing to hear. Hayley will be available to talk to you on the panel too today. I can see we've got some fantastic questions. So Hayley will be able to help answer those as we go into the panel.